Hello everybody. Today we're going to talk about an interesting case of two World War I German identification tags that were submitted by two Canadian viewers, Mike and his son Carter, who wanted help to know if they could figure out what happened to these two German soldiers. So the ID tags are part of what collectors call a grouping of souvenirs that was brought back by a Canadian soldier called William Brain, who was born in 1892 and who was from Hamilton, Ontario. And apart from the two identification tags, the grouping also consists of a few photographs and paperwork. So Mike and Carter wanted to know if it was possible to find out what happened to the two owners of the identification tags. So I've made several videos about World War II German identification tags and the fact that they can be very problematic because the name of the soldier is not written on them. And so this is a nice comparison we can do with World War I dog tags. So what's written on these World War I dog tags? The name and surname, the hometown, the date of birth, the unit the soldier did his training in, and then the soldier's field unit, with also a serial number valid within that field unit. And the ID tag is made out of zinc, which will survive well if buried. So this is a very good identification tag. And with the information on it, it's very easy to do research, and it would be very difficult to make any kind of mistake. So it's interesting to compare with the World War II German ID tags that only have the training unit written on them. So it's interesting to observe how the Germans had a very good system in World War I, and instead of evolving into something better in World War II, it devolved into something worse. So that's a kind of depressing thought to see that sometimes things, instead of getting better with time, they become worse with time. Other things in the grouping, so you see there's an address booklet with the name Schell written on it. So that's the same name as on one of the ID tags. And before even starting the research, things aren't looking too good for Mr. Schell because, as you can see, there's two bullet holes in this address book. So apparently whoever had this on him was hit by two bullets. And when we look at this address book, there's some interesting things to notice. Another example of things becoming worse between World War I and World War II in Germany. You see that here it has the Christian holidays and then also the Jewish holidays. And in between both of those, the Kaiser's birthday. And of course, on a World War II German document, you would have no Jewish holidays. The grouping also contains several pictures. They don't seem to represent either one of the owners of the dog tags. They're mostly postcards. So in those days, it was a big fashion to take a picture of yourself at the photographer, get it printed numerous times, and then use it as a postcard to write to friends and families. So most of these pictures seem to be postcards from relatives. And some of these photos are quite haunting. For example, this one, you can wonder who are these people and what happened to them. They're staring at us, from over 1 century ago. They're looking at us in the eye. But nowadays, we know that all of these people have passed away and are dead. On the back of one of the photos, William Brain noted by hand, apparently speaking about the German steel helmets, "These old steel lizzies make good washables for the troops." So he sounds like he had quite a gung-ho attitude. And at the same time, you can notice he made a couple of grammar or spelling mistakes, which is common on period documents, but not as common as in current YouTube video comments, I'm afraid to say. Perhaps yet another example of negative evolution. So now let's look into these dog tags in more depth. The first one is for a guy called Leonhard Schell, born in 1880, who was in the 4th Company of Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment No. 3. And the other one is for Luitpold Lerchenmüller, born in 1887, who was also in the 4th Company of Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment No. 3. So this is looking good because the World War I archives of Bavaria are scanned and online on the internet site Ancestry.com. So let's look at the first guy, Leonhard Schell. His file says that he was a farmer, that he was married to a woman called Maria, and that he was the father of 4 children. And he's listed as missing in action in Arras, France on April 9th, 1917. And then we see that a few months later in October, a witness comes forward, so presumably a survivor from his unit, who says that according to him, Schell was actually killed in action near the village of Thélus on April 9th, 1917, which confirms what we could have imagined when seeing his address book with 2 bullet holes in it. And his body has never been found since. Now let's look at the second identification tag for a soldier called Luitpold Lerchenmüller. He was a bit younger than Schell. He was born in 1887. His file says that he was unmarried, and he was firstly wounded in action at Arras in France in December 1914. And then he's also listed as missing in action on April 9th, 1917 in Thélus. In his case, no witnesses ever came forward, and you can see that in July 1920, his file says that he's still considered as missing in action, and his body was also never found. So what we have is 2 soldiers, both of them who were in the 4th Company of Reserve Infantry Regiment No. 3, and both of them who have been missing in action in the village of Thélus since April 9th, 1917. Now, I personally, before preparing this video, had never heard of the village of Thélus, but as we can see on the map, it's located right between Vimy Ridge and Arras in France. And the capture of Vimy Ridge is one of the most important battles in Canadian history, kind of like Omaha Beach for Americans, for example. And it's often even referred to as the moment of the birth of Canada, though to be honest, I'm not sure I would personally agree with that. And when did this Battle of Vimy Ridge start? You probably guessed it, April 9th, 1917, the exact same day that both of these soldiers were reported missing in action. And this map shows the planned artillery preparation for the Battle of Vimy Ridge, and you can see that Thélus is right in the eye of the storm, right in the middle of the battle. And according to Wikipedia, Thélus was captured by Canadian troops on April 10th, 1917, the second day of the Battle of Vimy Ridge. And what about William Brain? His file indicates that he was in the 4th Battalion. That's part of the 1st Canadian Division, and this period map shows that the 1st Division was responsible for the capture of the area south of Thélus. So once we fit all the pieces of this puzzle together, a probable scenario of what happened becomes painfully obvious. Schell and Lerchenmüller must have been killed in action during the fighting around Thélus, and William Brain came upon their bodies and decided to collect some souvenirs. And apparently William Brain collected their identification tags and the papers that he found on the bodies, therefore probably rendering both the bodies unidentifiable for later burial parties. So these 2 identification tags now constitute a fascinating relic of the Battle of Vimy Ridge, but their price was enormous, and I don't mean the current price on the collector's market, I mean their original price. These 2 souvenir identification tags costed 2 men their identities, and one of these men was the father of 4 children. And the reason these 2 men are still missing in action today isn't because they were disintegrated by artillery fire or something like that. The reason seems to be that somebody removed their identification tags from their bodies after they were killed. Now, souvenir hunting was something very popular during World War I, and I might be wrong about this, but it seems that for some reason Allied troops were much more keen to look for souvenirs than the Germans did. And taking things like buttons or belt buckles or helmets or bayonets is perfectly fine as far as I'm concerned. But taking a dead soldier's identification tag goes way beyond what's acceptable, and I wouldn't call that souvenir hunting, I would call it stealing. But to put things into perspective, the whole concept that we have nowadays of killed soldiers being sent home or buried in permanent military cemeteries was something very novel at the time. In wars before World War I, enlisted men had simply been undressed and buried in unmarked mass graves, and families didn't expect the bodies to be identified or to be returned or to be buried in some kind of permanent cemetery. So perhaps in the context of the time, William Brain didn't fully realize the consequences of his actions when he removed those 2 ID tags. Now, I tried writing letters to the hometowns of both the soldiers. In Schell's hometown, they indicated that his family had moved into town in 1916, and then that his wife and children had moved away again shortly after he was reported missing in action, so they didn't have any contact with the family anymore. And I did manage to get in touch with a distant relative of Lerchenmüller, but after sending me an initial email, she didn't respond anymore, so I didn't get much information. She was able to tell me that even though no body had ever been found, Of course, his family considered him to be dead after a few years. And now perhaps, thanks to this video, maybe some more relatives will come forward. So this investigation into 2 identification tags that surfaced in Canada over 1 century after World War I has brought us all the way back to the heart of one of the most important battles in Canadian history, and it illustrates the tragic price that a souvenir hunt had for 2 German soldiers. So that's the end of this video. I hope you found it interesting, and if required, I can be contacted at the email address shown here. Have a nice day and bye-bye.